Alrighty, good morning, everybody, or I should say, almost good afternoon. Hope everyone's doing well. We actually are on. Is it part three now, Tim?
Part two, the federal prison. Part three would be myself. Yeah.
Yeah, so total of three, but part two on his post-military career. And part two was very informative. It's doing very well view wise. And if y'all can, please like and subscribe to that one and share it. And please like and subscribe to this one because it helps not only get the algorithm in shall we say true crime circles, who also might be interested in military circles and vice versa. So please like and share. Tim, as you know, is a very interesting gentleman, and what we're going to be talking about today, because he was kind of laying the groundwork of what to expect in this podcast, of what he was going through, what the men he was surrounded by or would be surrounded by. Excuse me, that was unprofessional. And just what it was going to be like being surrounded by these hardened criminals, shall we say, for upwards of a few months, and what could go wrong and what thankfully didn't go wrong, but a few tiffies here and there. But without further ado, we're going to have Mr. Tim jump straight in. He's going to pick up where he left off and kind of lay the groundwork of what it's like having the top shot callers in his prison. And do you want to go ahead and bring that photo up of the leadership that you had?
Oh, I thought you had that picture. I can't post anything.
Oh yeah, I've got it. Do you want me to bring it up?
Well, yeah. Let me start off by saying thanks, Bud, for having me on.
Absolutely.
Thank you again for getting Luck Patterson on, talking about POWs and MIA. That was really special. But
He'll be back. Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you for
So,
hooking
so
us up.
for number two, I was working in the special housing unit at FCI Terminal Island, and I came to work one day and there were construction crews in our shoe, and they were beefing it up. They were moving showers, they were putting grills up along the tier. And I asked the lieutenant, and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He's like, "I don't know, I have no clue," which he knew, but they were trying to be all secretive. But we were going to be starting to receive some of the Aryan Brotherhood leadership, state and federal, and that's what they were beefing up our shoe on the top tier to, because this is the first time in history of the bureau that these Aryan Brotherhood killers and shot callers out of the ADX in Florence, Colorado, were being transferred. This was probably the first bus ride or plane ride to Terminal Island or anywhere they've had since the 80s. Because I think they were sent to the ADX in the 80s, the late 80s.
Oh yeah.
So this was a big deal for the bureau. Our warden volunteered because we're close to LA. The trial was in LA, and basically it was a young AUSA by the name of I want to say Greg Jessner that was he got indictments for the death penalty. He wanted to get these guys on a RICO case, and he wanted to give them the death penalty for what they were doing. So, like I was talking to Bud earlier, the first group of the Aryan Brotherhood guys we got in were lower level, and the assistant district attorney assumed that these guys would possibly roll on the leadership. So we got a group of these guys in that would go to court. It started off with a guy named Brian Healy. He came by himself, and the AB gave him a green light in Pelican Bay, and the green light was on his cellie and his friend. And they said, "Hey, he went afoul of the gang and did some things he shouldn't. We want you to take care of him." And Healy did. But come to find out, his friend and cellmate did nothing wrong. They were just testing to see if he was willing to kill somebody.
Jesus.
And so we got him in LA. I think he was there maybe a month, kind of quiet, low key, but he would go to trial. I don't know what information that he gave or when he or how he testified. But then after that, we got a bigger group in. If you want to post that picture, bud.
All righty. Yeah. Let's see here.
Yeah. So the gentleman in so Christopher Gibson's in the top row in the red, and then below him to the left is Barry Mills, and then below him to the right is TD Bingham. So those individuals we hadn't received yet, but the rest of these guys on here we received, and they were on the lower tier, and they were like some of them were doing life, but the individual on the top row, second over from the right, they call him, or his name was Slocum. They called him McCool. They called him McSlow. But he was in and out of prison, so he was their street guy. He planned armored car robberies, bank robberies, kidnappings. He planned he ran the criminal enterprise on the street. So he was directly, related to communications with Barry Mills and TD Bingham. The guy all the way top row, all the way to the left, that's Big Mark Owen. They called him Big Mark. He was probably 6'7", 8", but at this time, he was a heroin addict. He had been for a decade. So he was skinny and kind of, I don't know, he was kind of like the class clown on the tier. But
you don't look too healthy in that photo right there.
yeah. So hey, bud, I sent you a picture from Leavenworth with two tall guys in the back. Can you bring that up by chance?
Let's see here.
I said, yeah, and I mentioned in the picture it was the Leavenworth leadership, and there were two guys. One guy on the right, real tall, big dude, didn't have a shirt on, and that's it right there. So top row, all the way to the left, that's Mark Owen. 20 years before the other picture.
Holy crap! Look how big and healthy he was.
Yeah, so the guy all the way to the right, his name is, I forget his name, but we didn't get him, but he walked. He was like the drug guy for these pens, and he had a shamrock on his chest. He had a shamrock on his hand. So whatever penitentiary that guy landed at, that was his postcard. That was his ID. Like, hey, this is my shamrock. I'm running shit now in this.
I've got the keys of the car.
And yeah, I got the keys to this car. You want to mess with us and find out? McElhaney was his name. McElhaney. He ended up being his own attorney, and he was housed in LA. So I never met that guy, but the top guy to the left, that's Mark Owen, and you can see how much bigger he was back then.
That is crazy.
Now, if you want to go back to the first picture you posted, bud.
Let's see.
And we'll get into that. Like I said, the district attorney assumed these guys were going to roll on the top leadership, and I don't think they got a lot of testimony from these guys. So next to Barry Mills, to the right of Barry Mills, these names aren't coming to me. I forget his name, but he killed for Barry Mills. He beat a guy to death with a pipe, I think in Atlanta.
The Marzloff murder?
No, that was a different one.
Oh.
And then the guy in the second row, all the way to the right, that's Cleo Roy, and he killed a cop in the 70s. So he got life without parole. And he met Barry Mills when Mills was in Atlanta. And so what Barry Mills and TD Bingham were trying to do, it's almost like that a movie American Me, and the Mexican Mafia did it too, that they started separating the brand, or the Aryan Brotherhood, and the brand used that Like, okay, well, we got one guy going to Leavenworth, we got another guy going to Lompoc, we got one guy going to Terre Haute, another guy to Lewisburg, and when you get there, you'll have enough money to start your own group there, you know. So
Like
anyway,
the mob creating crews.
so this guy, the bottom row, second in from the right, his name is Joseph Principe, and believe it or not, he was a former Bureau of Prisons officer, and he worked at the ADX, so he knew all these guys, and he worked on I want to say, I forget the unit, but he worked that tier. He was around Mills and Bingham, and what he did is he was responsible for making it like a ruse, like, okay, I got to put this black guy in. Mills and Bingham would tell him, hey, put this black guy, he's the leadership of the Crips of the Bloods or the Black Guerrilla family, and we're going to have a meeting, we want to call a truce. So Principe, the officer, did as he was told. Well, guess what? Mills and Bingham went and took off on this black dude and almost killed him.
Oof.
He eventually got convicted of something to do with his girlfriend, kidnapping, attempted murder. But we got him thinking, the AUSA was thinking that, hey, this guy's going to roll over. I mean, he was an officer. He was part of the union too for the Bureau of Prisons. And so we got him. He was a big boy. And of course, he was anti-BOP, hated us. He was loyal to the Aryan Brotherhood, but because he was an officer, he would never gain entrance to the Aryan Brotherhood, of course. But I later talked to Mills, and he said they trusted him. He would do stuff for them, and he was solid and wasn't going to testify and all this other stuff. So
he just couldn't be a made man like in the mafia, having a cop in your family.
But yeah, what really sucked is he knew our policies and procedures for everything. So a disruptive inmate, he knew what we were going to do. So he tested us, and he made fun of us. And yeah, he was a pain. He was down there across from Mark Owen. But yeah, he was the only law enforcement officer that was part of this trial. And he was just a pain. He was a crybaby. He wanted extra this and extra that, and he was a problem child. The guy on the bottom row, all the way to the right, his last name is Turflinger. They called him Bart Simpson, and he was the jailhouse attorney. So he processed all the paperwork and court documents and all that. So we had these guys for I would probably say 3 or 4 months, and they were going to trial every day. And of course, even these guys, Mark Owen, the top guy to the left, he was he made a name for himself in the penitentiary. So the same thing happened later on when we got the leadership, but there were low level Aryan Nation inmates on our compound at TI that wanted to come in and pay respects. So they would commit all, they would commit small offenses like smart off to an officer or, get into an argument. And so he could be put in shoe or get caught with cigarettes or liquor. And so he could go to the special housing unit and meet up with these Aryan Brotherhood guys to show his respect and stuff. So to the population on the compound in the prison, these guys were like their version of Hollywood,
I can imagine. I mean, it'd be like, like movie stars today being somewhere in a hotel and, someone breaking in or whatever just to get a glimpse and say, oh my God, I love you, this and that, and then be hauled off, for breaking law or entering, private property or whatever. It's crazy.
Yeah, So, but I want to bring this up one last time before you take this picture down. So the guy in the top row, second to the right,
Top
that's,
row.
yeah, second to the right from the right.
Oh,
Yeah, right there. So that's Slocum. And now you want to talk recent years. So fast forward, Barry Mills and Gibson and Bingham, they had there was a court order against them for communication. They could not communicate with anybody but attorneys, and they couldn't make phone calls, they couldn't send letters out, they could receive legal mail. But Slocum in that picture, the top row, um, he was releasing from the ADX. And the only way to release from an ADX is they'll transfer you to a penitentiary, and then you will parole from the penitentiary. Nobody can parole from the ADX.
mm,
So in 2000, I forget when it was, 2014, Slocum gets paroled or transferred from the ADX to Victorville Penitentiary. And so it was strategic because there was a Aryan Brotherhood associate that was out of control there in one of the units associating with black inmates, which is prohibited, um, just causing chaos. And because there was no communication other than through inmates out of the ADX, Barry Mills and Bingham gave Slocum the order when he got the penitentiary to handle it. And so with my buddies at Victorville, a couple of them did tell me, and they agree, that Slocum got to Victorville with a green light on an inmate Snow. And he got two guys, two hitters, and made the plans, how they were going to do it, what day they were going to do it. And then, but Slocum played it smart. Slocum's like, hey, let me parole out of the pen first and be home before you do this. So they released Slocum back to his home. And 3 weeks later, inmate Snow was murdered. And they said that was a green light from Mills and Bingham. So this was 10 years after the trial. They're still doing stuff like this.
Jeez Louise. I mean, with and that was one of the questions as we're getting into this, and while we're still talking about these guys, what I guess it's like the mob and everything. It's, I mean, they've got the code of blood in, blood out. I mean, they've got to spill blood to get in, and by all essence, if you're wanting out, you're going to be killed to get out.
Yes, and if they can't get you, that's why there was a few. There's actually quite a few that testified against the leadership, because what they were doing is that went from, the blood in, blood out. We don't touch women, we don't touch children, we don't mess around with each other's wives, and it's all about business, and it's all about protecting the race. And then it turned into, well, if we can't get you, we're going to kill your family, which happened 2 or 3 times, where families were murdered of ABs that they couldn't get their hands on.
That, and I believe that's one of the, I mean, of course he said a lot of things, but I think that's one of the reasons Mike Thompson, the big Mike Thompson from the National Geographic shows, decided to drop out officially.
Yes, it was, but there were other things. I've learned through different podcasts and YouTube videos that I don't believe.
No, oh God,
80% of what Thompson says.
No, his just to start off the show, and your first couple words out of your mouth is, "I fought off 4 or 5 men with a knife," and all of that. That's just crazy, absolutely crazy.
Yeah, there were things that didn't happen, and he's on a special needs yard, or was. And that's where the majority of Aryan Brotherhood members go if they testify against the leadership. They go to these sensitive needs yards. But yeah, you can even get attacked on a sensitive needs yard. You know, there's been evidence of inmates that pretend to debrief.
Oh yeah, and get in there and do work.
And they pretend to get sent to these special needs yards to take out a green light, you know.
With and this is always curious. I always think it's to look intimidating, and because they read the Louis L'Amour cowboy books and all that with the big mustaches. But did you ever ask any of the guys why they had the big intimidating mustaches and the big handlebars and everything?
No, I think that was they had made comments like on the rec yard. Once we got that leadership in, you know, some of them would laugh, and it's just like, you know, it's like we're kind of like you know, old cowboys from the old West, basically.
Louis L'Amour from the book, the series, the brand. That's literally where they got it from.
Yeah. So to go forward, those individuals I told you about a few minutes ago that came and they were testifying, or they thought they would, the district attorney thought that they were going to testify. We had them for 3 months and then they left. And then it was pretty quiet for probably 3 or 4 more months. And then they started scooping up all the leadership, all the people that were on the death penalty case. There was probably, I want to say, over 30, 40 inmates that were on this death penalty case. And some of them went to LA. There was a group, in fact, Chris Gibson, he was sent to West Valley Detention Center, and they couldn't hold him. I don't know why he acted out there. I saw video clips of him fighting officers, but they said they couldn't handle him, and they wanted him sent to Terminal Island too. So that's when we got Chris Gibson, and then of course Heavley, Mills, and Bingham were flown in and then bussed in. I think they got to Terminal Island at like 1 a.m. They didn't really want them to see the route they took, and they wanted it to be under the cover of darkness, so they couldn't really determine where they were in LA, and to prevent, obviously, escape attempts and whatnot. So they rolled in about 1 a.m. We took them up to their cells. Of course, Terminal Island had never dealt with that caliber of inmate before, so the wardens like belly chain, leg irons, handcuffs, black box, the whole 9 yards, everywhere we transported them. So we put them in their cells, and then if you could imagine, they had the back cells. So Mills was in a back cell, and then next to him was an empty cell with his discovery, all his evidence, all his court papers, everything. And then another AB, Bingham, or not Bingham, but Heavley was in a cell, and then next to him was his discovery and evidence. So it was kind of like AB, the next cell, their evidence, next AB, and then across the hall or the tier, Bingham was there and Gibson. And they were allowed at any time to request to go to the discovery cell where they could look at evidence, and they had a typewriter. They could type their own evidence reports. They had a TV that played VHS tapes only, and then of course they had VHS tapes of evidence and shakedowns and things that the prosecutor or the defense attorneys would have, and the inmates are allowed to have that too. So that night they came in, they were exhausted. I had never seen them before, so they just looked like grandpas. They were just, they were good size, and you could tell they were in shape, but they were old. And they were tired. So we fed them, and then medical was there that early. So we started taking them over to medical one at a time to get their medical evaluation done, and then put them back in their cells. And then we interacted with them. They wrecked. But yeah, I had a lot of interaction with them. To me, they were just regular inmates. You know, you show me respect, I'll respect you. And they did. They were respectful. They were soft spoken. There were a few times they did notice that when they were on the rec yard, we had a warden that was all, you know, kind of like, you know, inmates need yoga and therapy, and they need our help, and we have to help them. And I guess he lied to Mills about something that he was going to put on the rec yard. I want to believe he said he was going to put up pull-up bars on the rec yard, and he didn't. He didn't sign off on it, and he went out to the rec yard to visit him, and Mills laid into him. Mills was yelling, called him a worthless piece of trash and the worst warden he's ever met. And that's the only time I ever saw Mills go off on a staff member. For the most part, like I said, they were just low key. They got attorney visits, and then of course the paralegals could visit, but the paralegals were also their like girlfriends. So they passed information back and forth. They knew the codes. They were 10 times above us on how to get coded message out through either visiting but it was, you know, behind glass or through a phone call. They were allowed to make phone calls. Of course, every call had to be monitored.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it was then the marshals came in, I want to say a week later, and we would take Mills and Bingham, and we'd take them out of their cells. We would strip them out, take our hardware off them, and then the marshals would come in and they would get them dressed in court attire, and then put their leg irons and chains on them and escort them out for the day. Now, some days they came back, and some days they stayed over in LA, and I would probably say out of the 8 months or 7 months they were there, they probably stayed in LA 4 times. Normally we got them back at night after court.
Was there ever a worry that they may try and buck loose? I imagine they're enjoying their digs and getting to watch TV and enjoy themselves and eat good, as opposed to being in Florence.
So you bring up a good point there. They didn't have TV they could watch in their cells, but they could get all the commissary they wanted.
Oh, so wow.
Our warden, who had never dealt with this caliber of inmate, is of course going to be like, oh, make them happy. I don't want problems. Just make them happy. So they shopped off a regular compound commissary list. And
wow.
And I came in one day. It was kind of funny. The shoe lieutenant, of course, is trying to get promoted, and he's all the yes man. So I came in one day, and there was a fridge in our lobby that we used for our lunches. And we came in, and there were things in there with notes on them that said AB only. And I asked the lieutenant, I go, dang, they're taking over our fridge too? And he goes, yeah. This is, you know, that they can order ice cream now from the commissary. So that's their ice cream in the freezer. And then, of course, the lieutenant, every time the tray was open, the feed tray or the bean slot, a lieutenant had to be present for the most part. And then we fed them. And so they were fed. They ate better than any time at the ADX. Because at the ADX, they got limited commissary, probably toothbrush, toothpaste. You know, that. And so this was the best they've eaten in probably 2 decades, you know?
Yeah, they weren't going to screw that up. I remember you mentioning at one point in time, you were talking about earlier them coming in and y'all trying to make sure y'all deprive them of any way of getting a layout of the compound, the entrance, the security perimeters, and all of that. And wasn't there a time either he was going out or got Mills got a visit or something, and he ended up writing a poem that basically described the entire prison security and the outside of the prison
Yeah.
without.
So you got part of it right. So halfway through the trial, and you got to remember at the ADX, that's sensory deprivation to the extreme. And when you lose certain senses, the sense of smell, your sense of hearing, or the other way around, if you lose the sense like to communicate or see other people, all your other senses are heightened. All your other senses, everything else is heightened through the roof. So they didn't know, the leadership didn't really know where we were, or they knew where we were, but not the location so far out into the bay. They didn't know what side the water was on. They had no clue. And so what they did is they listened to our radios for months. They listened to officers talk in front of them. That was probably not a big topic, but to them, they retained it. And so TD Bingham knew that we were costing the marshals overtime up the ass. Because there were officers, extra officers on the compound. There were extra officers in SHU, I believe. There was another mobile patrol implemented. So Bingham knew, and Mills, that there was a lot of money being spent on them. So between months and months of listening to what the officers said and to our radios, he started writing a poem to his girlfriend. And the poem, I read it, and it kind of rhymed, but it was like, oh, I would love to see the lush blue ocean water that's to my left. And I do believe that we're in the front of the building, and I counted 4 doors that separate us from the outside to ourselves, and just really crazy shit. Wow. And he sent that out knowing that we screened the mail, right? And so I came back, I think it was my weekend. I came back on my Monday, and they had 2 or 3 officers more overtime on the roof of SHU. And I'm like, what happened? Did one of them assault us? And they said, no, they intersected a poem that Bingham wrote about the location of our institution. And so Bingham didn't care about the letter. He didn't care if his girlfriend read the letter when she got it, but he knew that we would care after reading it and waste thousands more in overtime. It was his middle finger to the U.S. government,
Jeez, what? I mean, that's some of these people think just because they're locked away, these guys are dumb and just knuckle draggers. But these guys are brilliant in their own way. I mean, to survive and run a criminal empire the way that they do, it's just absolutely astounding, to be frank.
The information that got to Lewisburg to make war with the DC blacks, that came out of the ADX, and it was written in urine. And all the inmates, the white inmates, ABs at Lewisburg, just put heat under the letter, and they could see war with DC blacks. And so that's where they got them for ordering murders across the nation. Their reach was it wasn't limited, unlimited reach.
I mean, from the most secure prison in the United States of America, mind you.
Yeah, the AX, getting that information out, coded phone calls. But then they went to trial. So we got those guys. We had them. they started going to trial, and it was kind of an everyday thing. They would go to court, they'd come home after court, and some of them would usually sleep. And then the next day they would wreck. And I tell you what, for these guys that when we had them, they were in their 60s, they would go out. At first, the warden allowed one AB at a time on the rec yard, and we had, I think, 8 cages. And then, you know, they complained. So then they were like, okay, you can go out there 2 at a time. So Gibson and Hebley would go out, and then 2 hours later, Bingham and Mills would go out, and then they could pick, because they were talking. So they would pick, you know, whoever they wanted to wreck with that day. But there was one day I went out there, and you know what a 6-count burpee is, right?
Oh, yeah. That's
well,
a beast of a...
in 2 hours, they did 1,400.
Oof.
So they weren't slouches. And that's all they did was PT. PT in their cell. They'd get up in the morning. It was like roll call. You roll up your mattress and, okay, you sit-ups, jumping jacks, push-ups, burpees in their cell. And then they would do more on the rec yard when they went out there. So what was the question again, or comment? Yeah, so they would go to court, they'd come back, and they'd eat and sleep. And then, of course, on the weekends, they would, you know, they'd be at their window talking, because they were across from each other. So they probably hadn't really seen each other for 2 decades, because at the ADX, there's no contact at all, except for, you know, trying to talk. So this is the first time they saw each other probably in a long, long, long time, even though they communicated. But yeah, they went to court, and then they decided, hey, we want to bring in the state Aryan Brotherhood out of Pelican Bay. And these are witnesses. And it was kind of like the movies, kind of like, you know, Goodfellas or the Mexican Mafia movies, where, you know, it's like, hey, we haven't seen these guys for a while. Let's have a meeting. We'll use this court case as an excuse, and we'll bring them down from Pelican Bay. So we went from 4 federal top leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood to 15 more inmates that were the state leadership out of Pelican Bay.
Jeez.
And, you know, guys like, I'm trying to think. One of them was a Mexican Mafia member that was closely associated with them by the name of Ruben Castro, Night Owl Castro, I believe they called him. And then we had John Stinson from the Nazi lowriders.
Oof.
He came with them too, because they were all friends. And then we had a guy named Luttrell, a few other ones. But they were kind of, besides Stinson and the Mexican Mafia member, they were all kind of loudmouths. They'd kick their door, they'd call us names, and you'd go and talk to them, and they'd kind of be polite, and they acted up. And I remember going to the back of the tier through 2 grills, and I asked Barry Mills, I said, hey, you know, these guys are pricks, you know, is there any way you can send word, you know, down and tell them, hey, you know, be respectful, because we've been nothing but respectful, you know, we're not being assholes. And he said, well, they're kind of on their own program, Collier, you know, I'll shoot them a kite down there later, and, you know, that's all we can do. So they had really no control how the state acted, you know. So I guess during the night, Barry Mills or somebody shot a kite down to him, a note, and they were chill for a little bit. But they got the commissary the same as us, and, you know, they went to rec also, and we had to be careful though, because we had to handle all of them, because Turtle Island, the shoes in the cells in the special housing unit didn't have showers. There were 4 showers at the end of the tier. So when we had to shower these guys, you know, we had to, you know, everything, the belly chain, the black box, the leg irons, and we had to take them to the shower one at a time, give them 10, 15 minutes and then take them back, and then the next one. So it was real time consuming, but it was a time you had to be on point and be alert, because that was the closest you were going to get to one that get to one of these leaders face to face, even though they were in chains.
Yeah,
And
that's
this is a kind of a funny story I want to add. So in Bud's first picture he posted, there was a guy named Turflinger at the bottom. He was their jailhouse lawyer, and day shift was, I believe, 6 to 2. So if you moved an AB to the discovery cell in the morning before your shift, you had to take him back. The PM shift didn't mess with, we only did our own thing, right? So my buddy, that I still talk to today, really good dude, love him to death. He was checking out. He was going to start searching the discovery rooms, because we didn't get past. There was no word that there was an Aryan Brotherhood leader in any of the discovery cells. So my poor buddy cracked open the cell that had discovery in it, and Turflinger popped up from behind a box, and they looked at each other. And that was probably the only time in 30 years that Turflinger was around a staff member that wasn't handcuffed. So my buddy slammed the door really fast and locked it. And he stood there, and he told my buddy later that he was just in shock as my buddy.
I can imagine so, in that situation like that.
Like, are you guys gonna fight me, or what's going on? This is so weird. But anyway, so we they had their discovery, and like the state ABs from Pelican Bay, we had to monitor their phone calls. And but like I said, they didn't really interact with the Aryan Brotherhood leadership for the federal commission. Yeah, like I said, they were respectful. You could tell the hierarchy, because if one guy, say if Mills had an issue that he needed to either bitch or direct towards staff, they would use Gibson. Gibson was kind of their soldier, kind of their muscle, So they would kind of explain to Gibson, what happened and what to say. So when we heard a complaint, it was from Gibson, whether that guy on day watch, I asked him for, it could be simple like toilet paper, and 4 hours later I got toilet paper. That can't cut it, and things like that. But I noticed that there was a division of power, so to speak.
Wow, it's that's amazing, the separation between the state and federal leadership like that. That's you definitely think the state guys would have some fear they'd end up in federal after maybe not listen to the federal commission and end up getting their name thrown in the hat.
Yeah, they were loudmouths. This guy named Luttrell. So if any of the viewers have ever watched any documentary on prison gangs, Pelican Bay, any documentary, there's an intro to a lot of them, and it shows 2 inmates in yellow rain jackets standing next to a guy that was doing dips or pull-ups. And Gary Luttrell was the guy on the left that stabbed him. It was a hit. So the 2 guys in the yellow rain jackets, they start stabbing and chasing the other guy. Well, anyway, that's Luttrell. And that's one of them that we had. And he wouldn't shut up about it. That was like his claim to fame in his phone calls. But yeah, it was kind of sad listening to their phone calls, because some of them would be calling family. One of the inmates talked to his daughter, and she hadn't seen him in 13 years or whatever. And there was Luttrell called an old gentleman, probably in his 90s, 80s, and I forget where in California, but it was just like this. It was just an odd environment and horrible, actually, environment to grow up in. Because I remember him asking the guy, and it turned out this older man raised Gary. He was like a great grandfather, and Gary was asking him. Luttrell was asking him about his mother. What was my mother like? And this old man, I remember him saying, Gary, your mom was the town whore.
Oh, God.
I don't know who your daddy is. And of course, they both laughed. So it was almost like these guys were destined for a crime. You know?
And it was all lined up for them to be this way.
Yeah, it was. But, like I said, they came in just like we all predicted. None of them got the death penalty. They got that pulled off the table.
Yeah.
I think they all got an extra 7 sentences, but they didn't care. They knew they were going back to the ADX. In fact, there's I think articles where it says that Gibson's whereabouts are unknown. Gibson had a bad back, a really bad back. He needed back surgery, and I want to say probably 90% chance he's at Springfield.
That or Butner.
Or in rehab in some special wing they have, could be because he's still AB. For the viewers, you can look up Barry Mills, of course, passed away, I want to believe 6 years ago. Natural causes. If you want to look up, you can look up the last I know of that officer that turned Aryan Brotherhood associate. His name is Joseph Principe. And the last I Googled him, he was on top of his roof with no clothes on, waving the American flag, causing a disturbance, and he was arrested. So,
oh my God.
So that's the last I heard from him. Like I said, Bingham, I assume, is still running things alive. Heavily, I know, is still there, and he's with Bingham. But they're just these inmates. It's sad to say, would never, ever, ever make it in civilian life. They're so institutionalized.
Oh yeah, that's an understatement.
And I think a lot of your viewers know that the recidivism rate of them coming back, it's like a revolving door because they don't know how to socialize on the outside. They don't know how to act. There was the guy I spoke of earlier that was with the first group that almost beat a man to death with a pipe. I remember listening to a phone call from him to his mom, and he was trying to explain to her what a laptop was because they were offered stripped down laptops to write a report. They could just type, and then we had to print what they typed. So he was trying to explain to his mother what a laptop was, and he couldn't because he'd never seen one before. And of course, none of them had ever seen a cell phone. So they function better inside than they do out, and that's a shame for any human being. But for the most part, they were respectful. They talked to you. I could hardly understand Bingham because Bingham had this Southern accent, and he just talked like like a Southern good old boy, But they were all respectful. Like I said, to me, they were just inmates. They were just a higher level of inmates that I've ever dealt with. And they beat the death penalty case, and they do know of the AB members that testified against them, and who knows when and where they're going to hit.
Gosh.
But I assume they're all either 2005. They're either all dead or they're in witness protection, probably somewhere, with a different identity.
Yeah.
But they know their time's coming at some point. But yeah, I just want the viewers to realize this whole story. The Aryan Brotherhood, at the time, these white inmates are getting pushed into San Quentin and Old Folsom and these old state prisons, and they were the minority. There was a lot of black inmates, there was a lot of Mexican inmates, so they initially started the Aryan Brotherhood to have a backup for their race, to build their numbers up, and that's where it started. And then they put in rules, and I think I got a list of rules we found in a cell. I forgot what I did with it. But it was their commandments, of being an Aryan Brotherhood member. And
Wow.
And it was all about taking care of your own race. And they wanted the biggest and the baddest because they wanted to be low in numbers, but they wanted to be vicious. So
Special.
I
Yeah.
think there's been documentaries, that stated that although they're like the 3%, they contribute to 20 or 25% of the homicides in prisons, And then, of course, it went from, okay, let's align with the Mexicans. It's all about dope and money. It's all about money. So towards the end, I would say that right now, that old leadership is probably still stuck in their ways as far as, hey, it is about race, but then you got a new group or a new section, a subsection of Aryan Brotherhood members coming up and taking their places. And they're all about money, trying to, whether it's dope or extortion or, like I said, armored car robberies. And, they can move money around like you can do with your bank account. It's so easy for them to move money around. So I would say at one point it was protection out of survival, and greed took over, and then it became all about dope and really forget about the race part.
Oh yeah, they're known as the Heroin Brotherhood now. So that effectively tells you what's going on.
Are there any questions, Bud?
Not at the moment. Everybody's just glued in listening. We've had a good hour so far.
Yeah,
I've
I was going to take questions because that's kind of my.
Yeah.
They transferred out, I think, early morning after the trial, after the sentencing, and they kind of said, for those of us that were there, they said respectfully goodbye, take care, and it was kind of an end of an era for them because they were treated so well as far as privileges, rec and commissary and getting visits back to the ADX of prison food, no TVs, no commissary, no interaction with anybody. In fact, there is a Sam's order. I think they gave Bingham and Mills, and they're two of maybe 4 inmates in the nation that are under this no contact order.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't send letters, they can't write letters, they can't receive letters, they can't receive newspapers, it's complete and utter restriction from communication.
Yeah, that is insane. We actually we do have a question before we close out today. Mary Jo has a very good one that she wanted to get your thoughts on this. Mary Jo was curious about Upton Sinclair's book, The Goose Step, proposed all college students be conscripted to work in prisons because he felt inmates are the true measure of strength and weaknesses of a current culture. Could you comment on this?
Oh yeah, of course, and I totally agree with that. And what I say, are they rehabilitated? Do they want to be rehabilitated? Of the average inmate in prison? No, they just want to learn how to do a crime better, get home to their family. But there are educational opportunities, and there's many programs that the inmate can get involved in. And of course, college degrees, GEDs, high school diplomas, there's a few, I think, later in my career that got master's degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully they did rehabilitate themselves and get out and be a upstanding member of society. But yeah, it's But for the most part, I don't think I touched in the first video on rehabilitation, where it was really kind of an extra place for them to go out of boredom. Like, oh, I'll go to drug treatment and see what kind of dope is getting pushed on the yard. They weren't really trying to go there to get help. So they used a lot of our programs to benefit themselves, really in a negative way. You know, we even had at Terminal Island, we even had a list of inmates that volunteered to sign up for a culinary program, and we brought instructors and chefs from Cordon Bleu.
Wow.
And they were allowed to bring in food, like high-end food, and they would, you know, teach these inmates how to become chefs. And when they left the program and got out, they were certified chefs. You know,
Jeez.
I didn't see any of them come back. But then we also had a welding class where, you know, Terminal Island is built on the water, so there's a lot of docks, and you know, the longshoremen are close to us. So they had a welder come in and teach a group of volunteer inmates. They wanted to certify them in underwater welding, and that's good money.
Welding is big money this day and age. If you're good and can do underwater welding, that's Jesus. Yeah, I mean that's big money.
Yeah. So it's there's programs out there. I would probably say those two examples I gave were from the late 90s. So now, just because the lack of participation, it's just for the most part, education is not on their minds, you know, other than to, like I said, an excuse to go to the law library because there's an inmate there that owes you money, that type thing. So
I've got two more or one more before we close out, and I've got an idea to have you come back because there was one particular thing that I think we can get another hour out of, some of your other inmate encounters. But to close out, Jay was curious, did you ever have any incidents with inmates overstepping their bounds, maybe getting physical with you, or were you ever quote unquote attacked by an inmate?
Yes. Yeah, in 28 years at Terminal Island, we were young officers, and it was a time in the Bureau that it was fun to go to work. You know, it was kind of like, you know, let's try to see if we can beat them today, or they're going to beat us today. But there were times where inmates got in my face during a small disturbance. An inmate that had a combination lock on the end of a belt swung it at me and knocked me out. I got shoved down in an inmate fight in one of the units, and what had happened was this dumbass officer, you know, it's kind of like, well, the way I ran the units, inmates are going to have scams all day long. They're going to have, you know, dope. They're going to make hooch. They're going to hide weapons, or even smoking cigarettes or marijuana. And we have a big set of keys on us and a radio. So for my safety and their safety and respect, you know, when I was doing rounds, I didn't turn down my radio or hold my keys. I wasn't trying to be sneaky. But if I busted an inmate, I would tell them, like, hey, this is your fault. You didn't have a lookout. There was nobody watching for me, so that's why you're busted. And he was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So this officer went up there and he held his keys. He was all quiet, and he turned into a cell really fast. And there were inmates shooting dope.
Oh.
And they freaked. The officer freaked. The inmate's first response was attack. So 2 inmates attacked the officer while the other one was flushing evidence in the toilet. We responded. I ran up top tier. Inmate turned around, swung at me, hit me, knocked me back against the bars. Then I put him on the ground. So yeah, there were times, you know, me and my buddies we ran things hard, but we were respectful. So we were never pinpointed to be attacked. You know, some officers were.
Yeah.
But, you know, another whole section that I think we could get into is games inmates play.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like how they turn staff. How do they get staff to bring in dope? How do they get women officers to fall in love with them? There's tons of scams that they play that I think the listeners would enjoy. But yeah, to answer that question, yes, I've been hit, almost stabbed, knocked down. Yeah. Yep.
Let me get this correct right here. I think for another show we can do, because we just passed the hour mark here. I think talking about some of your other inmate encounters, some of the mob guys and such, but I think some of your interactions and the games inmates play to turn officers. I've always found that interesting, how they can set up escapes, get their people to bring in drugs for them, or what have you. I think that would be very interesting if you'd be open to doing another show with us.
Oh yeah, of course. And we can also get into, it's not just games they play against staff, it's games they play against weaker inmates.
Oh yeah. Let me clarify that as well.
That's interesting too. You know, it's
Dog eat dog world in there.
oh yeah, definitely.
Jeez Louise. Yes. All right. Did you before we close out for the day, did you have anything else you'd like to share before we close out, and we'll try and figure out a day sometime this week or weekend to do the next one?
Yeah, I just want to thank you again, Bud, for having me on. This is fun. It's, you know, being in that environment and for so long and not really having an outlet other than other officers I used to work with. But they go through the same thing of just kind of bearing what we went through and what we saw. So this helps. It's therapeutic to talk about it, I guess, was what I'm saying. And again, thanks for having me on. I'm glad we connected. People, you know, watch Bud's videos. They're awesome. You know, like the last one, I personally am involved in with his guest, Luck Patterson, because he's, I know him personally. My girl's
family.
And the struggles that my girl, his daughter Lindsay, has with dealing with him day to day, and his motivation and what motivates him, and it's just amazing for him to be on, as well as all your other guests, Bud. So thank you.
And we're definitely going to have Mr. Luck back on either later the week or this weekend sometime, because he's going to talk about going back to Vietnam. So he wanted to get back on because he had completely forgotten. He was kind of flustered at the moment. So I'd like to have him back on so we can share again. So we'll be in touch. We'll get set up for that part now, total of part 4. Maybe later this week sometime, and we'll get it set up.
All right. Thanks, Bud. Thanks again. And